Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Shane Beamer in South Carolina heading into the bye week, and we have an opportunity to do something we haven't really done yet for South Carolina in 2025, and that is take a step back and really dig in and evaluate what we've seen from this football team on both sides of the football. We're going to talk about the bad. And look, there's plenty of bad. There is plenty that South Carolina needs to clean up. But the one thing that I did realize when I was preparing this episode is that there's a decent amount of good. Quite frankly, there's a surprising amount of good that we've seen from South Carolina, specifically on the offensive side of the football. And I think that's where I want to start. Look, this South Carolina team thought they were going to be a run heavy offense and run the piss out of the football with a big offensive line with LaNorris Sellers at quarterback, Rasul Faison coming in through the portal. That's obviously not been the case. South Carolina throwing the football has actually been way better than it feels when you start looking at the numbers. That's one of the things I'm most excited to see for South Carolina coming out of the bye week is I'm looking at South Carolina and say, hey, you got to start leaning in to what your offense is doing well. And maybe just accept that, hey, the rushing attack is not going to be as dominant as we thought it was going to be heading into 2025. But what we're doing throwing the football, there's a lot of good. I think LaNorris Sellers has been pretty damn sharp. I think you have some difference makers stepping up on the outside that we probably didn't expect. And so I want to get into the good. I want to get into the bad on both sides of the football. We got a lot to talk about. The biggest overarching take that I have about South Carolina is the lack of identity and the lack of consistency. There's been some good, but there's been far too much bad. It seems like it's just been fits and starts for South Carolina, specifically on offense. But then, secondly, this team needs to find their identity on offense, and the identity can't just be LaNorris Sellers being Superman, right? You got to find a little bit more rhythm. You got to find a little bit more easy stuff that you can have success with because, look, we know South Carolina, they're going to be explosive. When you have a quarterback like LaNorris Sellers, the explosive plays will come. But if this offense is going to take a step forward, we need to find some easier stuff that we can get to on a consistent basis and provide a little bit more identity and consistency to the South Carolina offense. Because I'll say this, and we'll talk about the defense. Shoot, been a lot better than I expected. And I think that a lot of South Carolina fans that follow this program would probably agree. I get they struggled to tackle Ahmad Hardy on the road against Missouri 2 weeks ago. I'll say this though, outside of that, there's been a lot to like about this South Carolina defense. We'll dive into that too. Before we get into it, as always, the South Carolina fans, number one, appreciate you guys. The amount of support this fan base has shown the boys been amazing. Whether South Carolina is winning, whether they're not, we appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Without further ado, let's dive into it. We got a laundry list of things that I want to talk about. Let's start with the bad. Now, I think it's really important, especially in a bye week, to focus on, hey, what's not working and how do we clean it up? And I think there's a very, very clear problem, and that's the offensive line. And I'll say this, I very rarely get up here and call for coaches' jobs, right? It's just not really my style. You probably got to look at Lonnie Teasley, right? Because I look at this offensive line and say, man, there's some talent in this unit, right? We think he's recruited, whether it's at the high school ranks, whether it's using the portal, there's enough quality football players in this offensive line room. It's just not coming together on the football field Saturday afternoons. That's probably where it starts. To me, the biggest problem is the lack of continuity. I mean, go look at the amount of different players that have made starts for South Carolina on the offensive line. They have not trotted out the same starting five on the offensive line all year. Now, part of that's due to injury, guy like Case and Henry, but part of that's also due just not good enough play. South Carolina's biggest goal in the bye week needs to be, hey, what's our best starting five on the offensive line? And we got to rock with those guys the next couple of weeks and allow them to get a lot of snaps under their belt together because that offensive line position, it's continuity, man. That matters so much. Having these guys used to playing in the same spots with the same guys to the right and to the left. Haven't really gotten that. I will say this, the offensive line that we saw against Kentucky was probably the best version of the South Carolina offensive line. So I'd probably like to see that a little bit more going forward. I'll say this about the offensive line, man. Tree Babalede, I think he's starting to play some good football, right? And Josiah Thompson, who has been quite disappointing to start 2025, I also thought had his best game against Kentucky. And I think that matters for South Carolina going forward. But I think it's really important that we get the same starting five, starting multiple games for South Carolina over the next couple of weeks, because you can tell the communication and the chemistry, the way we pick up stunts in games and the way we pick up second level blitzes hasn't been all that great. And I think that starts with just this unit does not have a ton of continuity and chemistry together. Let's talk about the good, because the bad, hey, we're running the football 2.8 yards per carry. That's 128th in the country. LaNorris Sellers getting sacked on 11% of dropbacks. That's 130th in the country. Offensive line needs to get better, right? That's project number one. How about the good? How about the good? And how about throwing the football? Here's the stat that I think is going to surprise a lot of South Carolina fans. It surprised me. South Carolina on the year, their offense, 68% completion percentage. That is 22nd in the country. Pretty damn good. Top 25. Averaging 9.5 yards per pass attempt. That's ninth best in the country. So you're top 25 in completion percentage. You're also averaging 9.5 yards per pass attempt, which is top 10. But we're only throwing the football on 44% of our offensive snaps. That is outside of the top 80. There's a little bit of a misunderstanding in terms of what this South Carolina offense does well. I think they thought they were going to run the football well, so they've been trying to run the football a lot over the last couple of weeks. Guess what? That ain't working. Guess what is working? LaNorris Sellers dropping back and absolutely pushing that sucker down the field. LaNorris Sellers as a thrower of the football, that's pretty damn sharp. And then here's the other storyline: pass catchers on the outside, of which I think will only get better because you're leaning on a couple of young cats, Donovan Murph, Brian Rowe. How about this? Vandrevius Jacobs. This is a crazy stat. Has had 19 targets on the year, has caught 18 of them. It's a 94% completion percentage when Vandrevius Jacobs is catching the football, and he's averaging 17.9 yards per catch. This kid needs to get fed. He's getting open. He's catching everything that goes his way. And so I'm looking at this South Carolina passing attack and say, yeah, we got to protect him. If we're going to throw the football a lot, we got to make sure we're holding up in pass protection. But I'll say this: when South Carolina is dropping back and throwing the football, good things are happening. Maybe we need to lean into that a little bit more on offense. And I'm hoping that Mike Shula steps back and takes a look at, hey, we're quietly, I was going to say low key, but we're quietly throwing the football a heck of a lot better than we thought we were going to. Maybe we need to lean into that as we enter into the month of October. That's my take on the offensive side of the football. Defense, I'll say this: better than expected. And I want to start with the good because I think there's a lot of good from the South Carolina defense. And the good for me starts with the surprise standouts. I mean, you look at the numbers: 21 points per game allowed. That's top 35 in the country. 8.5% sack rate. That's top 27 in the country. You're only giving up 4.8 yards per play. That's top 30 in the country. The metrics look pretty dang good for South Carolina on defense. You're also forcing 2 turnovers per game. That's top 10 in the country. So we're still creating those negative plays. We're still creating turnovers. We said this after that Kentucky game. That version of the South Carolina defense kind of reminded us of the version that we saw in 2024. Surprise standouts. This has been the story. Where I want to start is probably Nick Barrett up front. This kid's been a freaking warrior for South Carolina. Nick Barrett, I got to find the number here on my note sheet. 191 snaps. Nick Barrett's 315, I think 321 pounds, I think what he's listed at. 191 snaps through the first 5 games. This kid's barely coming off the field, and he's been so damn good, and he's done exactly what we needed him to do, and that is be really stingy in the run game. Look, is Nick Barrett ever going to sack the quarterback 10 times a season? Like, he does not have the TJ Sanders pass rush ability. We knew that. We didn't expect that from Nick Barrett, but we knew one thing. We needed him to show up against the run. Nick Barrett is leading this football team with 12 run stops on the year. That's massive. Hey, the pass rush will work itself out. We got Dylan Stewart. We got Brian Thomas. We got Jatius Greer, who I think's playing pretty damn good football. We'll figure out a way to rush the pass. I ain't worried about that. My bigger concern was stopping the run. Outside of that Missouri game, South Carolina's been pretty dang good stopping the run. Here's another name I'll give you, Justin O at linebacker. This kid's a redshirt freshman, so he's going to be with South Carolina the next couple of years. 21 tackles, 3.8% missed tackle rate, which is extremely low. 8 run stops. Been damn good. South Carolina's got 2 linebackers who are going to be good. Fred Johnson, Justin O. They playing damn good football this year. They're going to be dang good football players for South Carolina in 2026. How about Brandon Sissy? Brandon Sissy, 9 run stops. That's second on the team from the boundary cornerback position. Has been targeted 19 times, has only given up 7 catches for a 36% completion percentage when Brandon Sissy is targeted, 4.8% missed tackle rate, which is extremely good for a boundary cornerback. This kid, we kind of knew he was a stud when he came over from NC State. He's been playing like a first team all SEC dude out on the boundary. The one negative I would say, and if we want to scroll down and talk about the bad, is that I feel like some of your best players haven't had a huge impact. If you were to ask me heading into the season, hey, name me the top 5 players on defense for South Carolina. Dylan Stewart's one, and he's been very, very good. Had his best game of the season against Kentucky. But my second answer would have probably been Jalen Kilgore at nickel. It probably would have been Judge Collier at the cornerback spot, and it probably would have been DQ Smith at safety. And look, it's not like they've been just downright bad. I guess what I'm trying to say is they haven't had the impact on the football game that many of us expected. Now, the first thing is all 3 of them have been banged up at certain times for South Carolina. So it's not necessarily like they've had a ton of opportunity to be good, but they've been quiet, right? Some of your best football players on defense, or at least the guys that we thought were some of your best football players, been awfully quiet for South Carolina on defense. Can you get Judge back healthy and get him going? Because look, Judge puts it together, plays the way he played last year. Brandon Sissy on the other side. That is a formidable boundary cornerback position. Jalen Kilgore at nickel, we want to see him get his hands on the football like we saw last year. DQ Smith, feel like we're not firing downhill, supporting the run the way I need him to. What happens if the guys who we know are damn good football players? I ain't getting up here and saying they're bad because there's a large sample size that's telling us they're good. We need them to be our best players on defense more times than they have been throughout the first 5 games of the season. I don't think a lot of South Carolina fans are sitting happy with a 3-2 record going into the bye week. There's a gettable next couple of games, right? I'm looking at that LSU game. I thought that was going to be probably a pretty strong loss. I think South Carolina poses a lot of different problems. For that LSU team can't run the football worth a damn. South Carolina's got an elite pass rush unit. You like your chances going on the road and beating a team like LSU. You can go win that game. Hey, starting to roll. Get a little bit of confidence. Finding our identity a little bit. This bye week feels big. I think South Carolina needs to do a decent amount of self-scouting and figuring out, hey, this is what we do well. This is what we're not doing well. And hey, sometimes there's no perfect team in college football. Like maybe this run game is just not going to be the run game we thought it was going to be. That's okay because the passing attack is way better than you thought it'd be. Lean into it. Maybe it's not like you stop running the football, but maybe you just stop leaning into it as much and you start leaning into what you're doing well. Because if you do that and you start getting a little bit of rhythm on offense, this defense giving you chances to win a lot of football games. We'll see how it turns out. Again, I'm not trying to sunshine pump because we got some problems, specifically on the offensive line that we have to figure out. There's more good than I think a lot of South Carolina fans probably think there is with this football team right now. The problem is the bad is at important positions. It's really, really hard to win in the SEC when you don't have a good offensive line. And South Carolina just flat out hasn't been good up front this year. Getting their guys back healthy, finding the right starting 5, maybe we can kind of start climbing the ladder a little bit and getting this offensive line where it needs to be. Because outside of that, there's some things that you like, man. We just got to start leaning into it a little bit more. All right, that was long. I apologize. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.